They were young, bold, and hungry for adventure. But when 5 students mocked the village elder's warning and ventured deep into the cursed forest, only one returned. What happened in those haunted woods? What did they awaken? And why does the survivor now whisper to the trees in the dead of night? This is the chilling tale of the students who ignored the elder's warning and vanished. The cool winds of the evening whispered through the tall trees, casting long shadows over the small village of Osogbo. In the heart of the village, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, there was an ancient story, one that mothers and grandfathers passed down to their children and grandchildren. It was a story filled with warnings of things best left untouched, of paths that should never be crossed, and of spirits that never truly sleep. But like so many young souls, the students of Osogbo, eager to learn, filled with the fire of youth and the bravado of the unfamiliar, didn't heed the elders. They laughed, joked, and set their minds to defy the very forces that had kept the village safe for generations. Now they were gone, vanished without a trace. This is where our story begins, with a group of 3 students who dared to challenge the boundaries of their world. It was just another day in Osogbo when the 3 students, Chaik, Amina, and Kofi, sat beneath the large mango tree near the village square, preparing for their end-of-year exams. They had spent most of the semester in the village school, studying hard, determined to pass with flying colors. But there was one thing they hadn't anticipated: the warning of Elder Ajiro. Elder Ajiro, a revered figure in the village, was known for her wisdom and deep connection to the spiritual world. Her skin was weathered with age, but her eyes held the brightness of 1,000 stars. She often spoke in riddles, weaving tales of long-lost traditions and spirits that roamed the land, unseen by most, but felt by those who knew the language of the earth. That afternoon, as the students gathered their books and laughed at the latest gossip, Elder Ajiro approached them. The wind seemed to grow colder as she neared, and for a brief moment, the air felt thick, heavy with the weight of her presence. "Chaik, Amina, Kofi," she called out, her voice a soft yet commanding tone. "There is something you must know before you leave the village." The students stopped, their laughter fading as they turned their attention to the elder. "You are all young," she continued, her eyes scanning the horizon, "and I see the fire of ambition in your hearts. But do not let that fire consume you. There are places in this world where the living should not tread, and there are forces in this village that you cannot see, but they see you." Amina, always the curious one, laughed nervously. "What do you mean, Elder? Are you speaking of ghosts and spirits again?" Elder Ajiro gave a grave nod. "Yes and no. There are places in this world where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. One such place lies deep in the forest, near the old ruins of Olamide's temple. The spirits there are restless, angry. They were once protectors, but they've been forgotten. If you go there, they will claim you. Do not ignore my warning, for many have tried to challenge the spirits, and none have returned." Kofi, the most skeptical of the group, scoffed. "We're not afraid of old stories, Elder. We're just students. We don't believe in all that nonsense. We'll be fine." Elder Ejiro's expression hardened. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "You think it's just a story? You'll learn soon enough that there is truth in every legend. Ignore my words, and you'll be the next ones to vanish, just like those before you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the students with a chill that none of them could shake. The warning was clear, but none of them truly understood it. It was 2 days later when the students decided to take a trip to the Olamide ruins. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills, casting an orange glow over the village. Amina, excited by the idea of exploring the forbidden, had convinced Chaik and Kofi that it would be an adventure they would remember forever. They packed their bags with snacks, water, and their smartphones, eager to document their courageous journey. As they walked into the dense forest that surrounded the village, the air grew thicker, the trees towering above them like ancient guardians. The path was narrow, barely visible beneath the thick undergrowth, but they pressed on, excited by the thrill of defying the elder's warning. "Can you feel that?" Chaik asked as they walked deeper into the woods. He was always the most cautious, but his excitement pushed him forward. "What?" Kofi replied, glancing around. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves. The silence. "It feels unnatural." Amina waved him off. "It's just the forest, Chaik. We're fine. Just a little farther and we'll see the ruins." But Chaik couldn't shake the feeling. The wind had died down, and the silence was unnerving. It felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But they pressed on, determined to prove that the stories were just that. Stories. As the sun began to set, they reached the ruins. The Temple of Olamide was little more than a few crumbling walls and a series of weathered statues. Despite the decay, there was something undeniably sacred about the place. The air here was heavy, as if the spirits had once lived here and still lingered in the shadows. "Wow!" Kofi exclaimed. "This place is amazing. It's like stepping into history." Amina, always the first to explore, immediately began taking photos of the ruins. "This is going to get so many likes on Instagram," she said, unaware of the tension in the air. Chaik stood back, feeling the weight of the elder's warning pressing on his chest. He looked at the statues, their stone eyes seeming to follow him, and the ground beneath him felt cold, as though the earth itself had absorbed centuries of sorrow. Suddenly, the wind picked up, rushing through the trees and causing the leaves to rustle like whispers. The temperature dropped sharply, and for a moment the world seemed to grow darker. "We should go back," Chaik said, his voice shaking. "I don't like this." Amina and Kofi laughed, brushing off his concerns. "You're just scared," Kofi said. "There's nothing here. It's just old stones." But Chaik couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't the place. It was the feeling of being watched, of something unseen waiting for them. And that's when it happened. Without warning, Amina screamed. Her phone dropped from her hands as she stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. "What's wrong?" Kofi shouted, rushing to her side. "I saw something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There was something in the shadows. Figure. It was watching me." Kofi scoffed. "It's just your imagination, Amina. You've been taking too many pictures. Let's go home." But Chaik wasn't so sure. He had seen it too. Just a flicker, a shape in the darkness that had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Let's leave," Chaik urged, his voice tight with fear. "Now." Reluctantly, they began to head back the way they came, but as they turned, Kofi froze. His eyes locked onto something in the distance. A shadow, tall and cloaked, standing by the edge of the ruins. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but they all felt it. A presence, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the shadows seemed to stretch, swallowing the light. Before they could react, the figure in the distance stepped forward, its form becoming clearer in the growing darkness. And then, with a deafening silence, it was gone. The forest fell still again. And Amina was gone. The silence of the forest was unnerving. The wind, which had once howled through the trees, now stood still as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath. Chaik stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes were locked on the spot where Amina had been just moments ago, where she had screamed and vanished into thin air. Kofi stood beside him, equally stunned, but his mind was racing. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath. "She couldn't just vanish. Where is she?" The world around them felt like it was closing in. The trees towered overhead like silent sentinels, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. A chill crawled up Chaik's spine as he realized that something far beyond their understanding was at work. This was no accident. Something had taken Amina, and they were next. Kofi, unable to contain his anxiety, grabbed Chaik's arm. "We need to find her now." Chaik nodded silently, his mind too clouded with fear to offer any logical solution. His thoughts were jumbled. He was confused, scared, and overwhelmed. They had come to explore the ruins, to prove that nothing in the stories the elders told was real. But now, reality was something they couldn't grasp. It was slipping through their fingers like sand. The forest seemed different now. The trees loomed like giants, their gnarled roots twisting and curling along the ground, as if trying to reach out and grab the students. Every noise felt amplified. Each rustle of leaves, each crack of a twig, each whisper of wind was sharp and unnerving. "We'll find her," Chaik said, trying to steady his voice. But even as he spoke, his heart thudded in his chest, a constant reminder of how little control they had over the situation. "Let's start by retracing our steps." With that, they turned and walked back to where Amina had been standing. They searched the area around the ruins, calling her name, hoping for a response that never came. The darkness was closing in fast, and with every passing minute, the sense of urgency grew. The two of them called out for her again, their voices echoing through the forest, but the only reply they received was the eerie whisper of the wind. The feeling of being watched never left them. Each rustle in the leaves, each shadow in the distance made them stop in their tracks, afraid to move forward. Minutes felt like hours. Kofi's voice was breaking with panic. "Amina, please, where are you?" But there was no answer. Nothing. "Maybe we should go back," Chaik suggested hesitantly. "We can get help. We can get the elders. They'll know what to do." Kofi's eyes were wild with desperation. "We can't leave her. We need to find her before something happens to her." Chaik turned toward the thick forest, his heart racing as the shadows seemed to grow longer. His mind wandered back to Elder Ajiro's words, the warning that had seemed like nothing more than an old myth at the time. "There are places in this world where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. If you go there, they will claim you." Chaik felt the weight of those words pressing against his chest, suffocating him. What had they done? They had ignored the elders' warnings, brushed them off as superstition, and now their friend was missing, gone into the depths of the forest where the spirits lurked. "We need to go back to the village," Chaik said, though his voice trembled with doubt. "We're not equipped for this. We need help." Kofi shook his head violently. "I don't care. I'm not leaving without Amina. She needs us." Chaik looked around, his eyes flickering nervously from shadow to shadow, feeling like something was creeping behind him, waiting to pounce. But Kofi wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the darkened path ahead, his feet already moving, determined to search further into the forest. Despite his fear, Chaik followed. They had to find Amina. They couldn't go back. Not yet. After hours of wandering deeper into the heart of the forest, the light of the sun was nearly gone. The students had long abandoned the idea of returning to the village. Now, all that mattered was finding Amina. As they walked further, the forest began to feel unnatural. The trees were different here. Taller, older, their trunks twisted and gnarled. It felt as though they were no longer in the same forest they had entered earlier in the day. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and every step seemed to pull them further from the world they knew. "I can't take it anymore," Chaik whispered. "This isn't right." "I know," Kofi replied, his voice barely a whisper. "But we have to keep going." The trees around them grew denser, and the path disappeared entirely. The forest had closed in on them, and the only light now came from the fading moon, casting a pale glow across the twisted ancient roots of the trees. Then, through the silence, they heard something. A low, guttural sound, a groan of some sort, followed by a sharp cry that made Chaik freeze in his tracks. "Amina!" Chaik called out, his voice trembling with hope. They followed the sound, moving quickly but cautiously. They had to be close. They rounded a corner, and there, lying at the base of a giant oak tree, was Amina. But she was different. Her eyes were wide open, staring vacantly into the distance. Her body was unnaturally still, as though she had been frozen in time. Her clothes were torn, and there was a strange, dark stain on her hand. Kofi rushed forward, calling her name, but Chaik stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Don't touch her," Chaik whispered urgently. "There's something wrong. I can feel it." The air around them felt charged, heavy with something they couldn't explain. The shadows seemed to move on their own, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. Amina's eyes flickered slightly and she whispered, They are coming for you too." Before either of them could react, her body twitched violently, and she let out a scream, an inhuman guttural sound that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. Chaik and Kofi stumbled backward in shock, their hearts racing. It was as though Amina was no longer herself. Something had taken hold of her, something dark, something ancient. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scream stopped. The forest went deathly silent again. Chaik's mind raced. This wasn't Amina anymore. She had been taken, consumed by whatever dark force haunted these woods. And they were next. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, broke the silence. The students turned in unison, their eyes wide with terror as the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. From the shadows of the trees, figures began to emerge. They were not fully human, their faces twisted and distorted. Some wore ancient masks, others were cloaked in dark robes, their bodies unnaturally tall and thin. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and they moved with a grace that was both unsettling and unnatural. The spirits were here, and they were angry. "You should not have come," one of them whispered, its voice like 1,000 whispers combined into one. "The forest is ours." Chaik and Kofi stood frozen, unable to move. They had heard the stories, the warnings, but they had never imagined this, the cold, crushing reality of it. The spirits of the forest were real, and they had been awakened by their defiance. "You have crossed the line," another spirit spoke, its voice laced with venom. "Now you will pay the price." As the spirits drew closer, the ground beneath the students' feet seemed to shift. It was as though the forest itself was alive, reacting to their presence. The wind began to howl, and the shadows deepened, swallowing the light. In that moment Chaik knew. They were not leaving this place. Not alive. The air around them thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The spirits circled slowly, their glowing eyes never leaving Chaik and Kofi. The whispering in the wind grew louder, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as though the forest itself was alive. Chaik's heart raced, and for a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. Was this real? The elders had warned them, but now they were trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by forces beyond their comprehension. Kofi's face was pale, his body rigid with fear, yet there was a glint of something more, something desperate, in his eyes. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. "You shouldn't have come," the spirit who had spoken earlier repeated, its voice a haunting blend of anger and sorrow. "This land is cursed, and so are you." Chaik could feel his legs beginning to tremble. The presence of these spirits was suffocating, as though the very air had thickened around them. His thoughts raced. What had they done? They had ignored the elders' warnings, thinking they were invincible. But now it was clear. The forest had claimed them, and they had become part of its ancient curse. The spirits moved closer, their movements fluid and unervingly graceful. Their faces remained obscured by dark hoods and ancient masks, their eyes glowing with otherworldly power. Chaik's breath quickened, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. "Please," Kofi's voice cracked. "We didn't mean to. We just came to explore. We didn't know." The spirits paused, their gazes fixed on him, and the whispering stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but an oppressive silence, and then the leader of the spirits spoke. "You should have known," it said, its voice dripping with sorrowful disdain. "The forest remembers all who trespass. And now you will pay the price." Chaik's pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out the whispering wind. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "We didn't do anything wrong. We just wanted to learn." The spirits' laughter echoed around them, sending a chill down Chaik's spine. It was a sound that felt ancient, as though it had come from a time before time itself. "You were warned," it said coldly. "Now your punishment begins." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted violently, sending Chaik and Kofi stumbling. A low rumbling sound reverberated through the forest, and the trees around them groaned as if they were alive. The air grew cold, and a dense fog began to roll in from every direction, obscuring their vision. The trees twisted in unnatural ways, their roots rising from the earth like clawed hands, reaching for the students. "You've awakened the forest," the spirit leader continued. "Now you will understand its power." The fog grew thicker, and Chaik could barely see Kofi beside him. The sounds of the forest, its whispers, its groans, were all around them, disorienting and terrifying. They were no longer in control. The forest had claimed them, and the spirits were its enforcers. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble again, this time more violently. The trees creaked and cracked, their trunks bending unnaturally as though they were bowing to some unseen force. The fog became so dense that Chaik could barely make out the shapes of the spirits around them. "Stay close," Chaik shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening wind. But Kofi didn't respond. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes wide with terror. A cold, clammy hand brushed against Chaik's arm, and he whipped around, expecting to see Kofi standing there. But it wasn't Kofi. A shadowy figure emerged from the fog, a figure that looked like a man but was distorted, its body elongated and twisted, its face a nightmare of masks and hollow eyes. It reached out with skeletal hands and grabbed Chaik by the wrist, pulling him toward it with inhuman strength. "No!" Chaik screamed, struggling to break free, but the creature's grip tightened. Kofi, still frozen in place, watched in horror as his friend was dragged toward the forest. He wanted to help, but his legs wouldn't move. Fear had locked him in place. What were they doing to them? Chaik fought against the creature, but it was like trying to fight the wind. Impossible. The fog surrounded him, thick and suffocating, and the whispers of the spirits filled his ears, becoming louder and louder until they were deafening. "This is it. This is how we die." But then, just as Chaik thought he could not fight anymore, the creature stopped. The forest fell silent. The fog parted briefly, and the trees seemed to part like curtains opening. Chaik was left standing, breathless, his heart racing in his chest. He turned around to find Kofi standing there, looking just as confused and terrified as he felt. The spirit leader was gone. The other spirits had disappeared into the mist. What just happened? Kofi gasped. Chaik's breath was still coming in ragged gasps. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Now." But the path was gone. The forest that had once been so familiar now seemed alien, hostile. The trees had twisted, and the ground beneath their feet had changed. Nothing made sense anymore. They stumbled through the mist, trying to make sense of the disorienting world around them. It was as though the forest had become a labyrinth, and every step they took only led them deeper into the unknown. "How do we get out?" Kofi asked, his voice thick with fear. "I don't know," Chaik replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We just have to keep moving. We can't stop." But the forest wasn't going to let them go that easily. As they pushed forward, the air became heavier, the trees closer. It was as though the very forest itself was closing in around them, trapping them. And then, in the distance, they saw something. A flicker of light, a faint glow just ahead. Hope surged through Chaik's chest. Maybe it's the way out. But as they moved toward the light, the ground beneath them shifted once more. The trees grew even closer, and the air became thick with an unnatural weight. A sudden cry echoed from somewhere deep in the forest, and Chaik froze. "What was that?" Kofi whispered. "I don't know," Chaik said, his voice trembling. "But I think we've just walked straight into the heart of the curse." A cold breeze swept through the trees, and the whispering began again, this time louder, more insistent. The voices were no longer just whispers. They were commands, orders, pulling them deeper into the forest. The light ahead flickered, and then, with a final deafening crash of thunder, the forest seemed to erupt. From all around them, the spirits appeared once more, their eyes glowing with fury. They encircled Chaik and Kofi, their faces twisted with anger and sorrow. The forest had claimed them, and now they would be made to pay. "You have trespassed in our domain," the spirit leader intoned, its voice cold and unyielding. "But there is one way to save yourselves." Chaik and Kofi exchanged glances, their hearts heavy with dread. "You must offer a sacrifice," the spirit continued. "A soul must be given. And it must be one of your own." Chaik's stomach dropped. "A sacrifice? We don't have anyone to give." The spirit shook its head slowly. "You do. One of you must stay." Kofi took a step back, his face ashen. "No. Well, we can't do that. We can't choose." The spirit's eyes glowed brighter, its form flickering in and out of existence. "Then you will both remain here. Forever." A strange sensation washed over Chaik. It was as if the forest itself was calling to him, pulling him closer to something deeper, something ancient. The air grew heavier, almost unbearably thick, and for a fleeting moment, he could hear whispers in his mind, voices long forgotten, speaking in languages he didn't understand. Chaik's eyes closed, his thoughts spiraling into confusion. His body was trembling, not from the cold but from the weight of something far more sinister. He could feel the spirits of the forest pressing against him, trying to force him to make the choice, to take control of his fate. But Chaik had no control, no power. The decision was beyond him. Then, through the chaos, he heard Kofi's voice, low, strained. "Chaik, maybe it's me." Chaik blinked, shaking his head in disbelief. "What? Maybe it should be me," Kofi repeated, his voice cracking. He looked over at Chaik, his eyes haunted. "You've always been the one to protect me. Maybe it's time I take the burden." Chaik's heart ached. "No, this can't be real. We've been through so much together. How could either of us choose?" Kofi's face was a mask of sorrow, but there was something else behind his eyes, something more resolute, as though he had already made up his mind. The forest had been watching them for so long, whispering in their ears, and now it had given them the unbearable choice. The curse had twisted the path before them. There was no escaping it. The spirits circled them, their eyes unblinking, waiting for an answer. The silence was thick, suffocating, pressing on Chaik's chest, making it harder to breathe. Kofi's words hung in the air, heavy and painful. "Chaik, we don't have a choice. We both know this." Kofi's voice was calm, eerily so, as though he had already accepted what the forest had demanded. Chaik's heart shattered. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't the adventure we had set out for. But Kofi was right. They had trespassed into the heart of the forest. They had defied the warnings. They had thought themselves invincible, that the forest could be conquered, that the spirits were nothing more than stories. But now, they were standing on the precipice of an impossible choice. Kofi turned to face the spirit leader. "I'll stay," he said, his voice unwavering. "Let my life be the price for our freedom." The spirit leader's glowing eyes flickered, and it tilted its head, as if in consideration. The other spirits murmured, the air thickening with anticipation. "No!" Chaik shouted, his voice breaking. "We can't." "Chaik," Kofi interrupted gently, taking a step back toward the center of the clearing. "It's okay. This is the only way. You're going to get out of here. I've lived my life. Have no regrets. But you have so much more to do." Tears welled up in Chaik's eyes. His mind was reeling. How could this be happening? "I won't leave you here," Chaik said, his voice hoarse. "I won't let you." But Kofi smiled faintly, a soft, sad smile that only deepened the agony in Chaik's heart. "It's already done, Chaik. You don't have to save me. You have to save yourself." The spirit leader moved closer, its presence cold and commanding. "The choice is made. The price will be paid." Chaik couldn't speak. He stood frozen, his entire being consumed by the horror of the situation. But Kofi remained calm, standing at the center of the clearing, awaiting the inevitable. The spirit leader raised a hand, and the air around them shifted, growing colder still. The other spirits stepped back, forming a circle around Kofi, their glowing eyes casting an eerie light over his face. Chaik took a step forward, his legs trembling, but before he could reach Kofi, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees twisted and groaned, and the ground beneath them shuddered. The spirits' whispers rose into a deafening crescendo, the voices growing louder, urging the sacrifice to be made. With a final, chilling whisper, the forest fell silent. Kofi's body began to glow faintly, a soft golden light enveloping him. The spirits stepped back, their faces hidden beneath their masks, their eyes fixed on the glow. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their twisted branches reaching toward Kofi as though they were welcoming him into their embrace. Chaik stood frozen, his mind unable to comprehend what was happening. His friend, his brother in this journey, was disappearing into the very forest they had trespassed upon. "Goodbye, Chaik," Kofi whispered, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The forest's curse had claimed him. Kofi's body flickered once, and then, with an almost imperceptible sigh, he was gone. The light that had surrounded him faded, and the forest was still once more. Chaik's heart cracked as the weight of the sacrifice bore down on him. He fell to his knees, his mind blank, his thoughts spiraling into a void of grief and loss. He had failed. He had lost his friend, his brother, and there was no escaping the curse that had claimed them both. But then, something unexpected happened. The spirits, once foreboding and terrifying, now seemed to step back. The oppressive weight that had surrounded him began to lift. The fog cleared, the trees parted slightly, and the path ahead was revealed. The forest had taken what it wanted, but in exchange, it was allowing him to leave. Chaik stood slowly, his legs shaking, but there was a fire in his eyes now, a resolve born of loss. He was leaving. He would leave with Kofi's sacrifice on his shoulders, but he would survive. He would go back, tell their story, and make sure that no one else would ever ignore the warnings. As he neared the edge of the forest, Chaik paused and looked back one last time. The trees stood silent, their twisted branches swaying slightly in the evening breeze, as if watching him. He shivered and turned away, moving toward the village with a renewed urgency. The village was quiet when he arrived, the usual sounds of evening life missing. No children playing, no elders sitting under the baobab tree, no voices calling out in greetings. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting for something. As Chaik walked deeper into the village, he noticed the people, gathered in small groups, murmuring to each other. Their eyes, however, were not filled with the usual warmth. Instead, they seemed distant, unsettled. Chaik's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the familiar hut that had once been his home. He entered and found his mother sitting by the fire, her face pale and weary. She looked up at him with tear-streaked eyes, but it was clear that something was different. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the absence of Kofi. "Chaik," she whispered, her voice shaking, "you've returned, but at what cost?" Chaik swallowed hard, the lump in his throat unbearable. "Mother, Kofi. He sacrificed himself for me." His voice cracked. "The forest, the spirits. They." His mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rose slowly and walked over to the door, peering outside as if expecting something. Chaik, confused, followed her gaze. At the edge of the village, near the trees, a faint glow appeared in the distance, a soft, flickering light that danced among the shadows. It was the same light Chaik had seen in the forest, the eerie glow that marked the presence of the spirits. "Mother, what is that?" Chaik asked, his voice trembling. But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned to face him with wide, terrified eyes. "You didn't just leave the forest, did you, Chaik?" she whispered. "The curse. It follows you. It's inside you now." Chaik stepped back, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" I left. I'm here." But his mother's face hardened with an expression of fear. The spirits don't let go so easily. Once they've claimed something, they don't simply forget it. You left the forest, but the curse came with you. You brought it back. The realization hit Chaik like a slap to the face. All the memories of the spirits' whispers, their glowing eyes, the mist, everything that had seemed so far behind him now felt unervingly close. He could feel it deep within him, an unsettling presence, as though the forest was still alive inside him, watching, waiting. The soft glow in the distance grew brighter, flickering like a fire that could never die. Chaik's breath caught in his throat as the light began to move toward the village, slowly at first, but with an undeniable pull. "Chaik," his mother said, her voice urgent now. "We have to go. Now." Chaik didn't question his mother's urgency. He followed her out of the hut, but the village had already begun to change. The air was thick and oppressive, and the distant light had turned into multiple smaller glows, each one moving through the village like searching eyes. It was as if the entire forest was alive, and it had come to claim what was rightfully its. The whispers from before were growing louder, clearer, reaching Chaik's ears with a chilling intensity. His mother pulled him into a nearby hut, slamming the door behind them. But even through the walls, Chaik could hear the whispers of the spirits, now nearly deafening. "It's the forest," his mother said quietly. "They've come to reclaim you, Chaik." Chaik's heart was pounding now, his thoughts racing. He tried to think of something, anything that might save them. But his mind was clouded, overwhelmed by the overwhelming presence of the spirits closing in. Suddenly, the door flew open with a violent gust of wind. Chaik looked up, his body trembling with fear, to see the spirit leader standing in the doorway. Its form was twisted and distorted, more horrifying than ever before, its glowing eyes fixed on Chaik. "You cannot escape," it intoned, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "The forest has claimed its price. And now you must return to us." Chaik's mind raced. "No, I can't, this isn't right." His mother grabbed his hand, trying to pull him back, but it was too late. The spirits were everywhere now, their ethereal forms moving like shadows in the night, closing in from all sides. "You've come back to the forest, but you cannot leave," the spirit leader continued, its voice low and mocking. "The price of freedom is high. Your friend has already paid. Now it is time for you to repay what you owe." Chaik felt his body tremble, his heart thundering in his chest. He was caught in a nightmare, unable to escape. But something within him refused to give in. "I can't lose everything I've known. I can't lose Kofi's memory." In that moment, the spirits seemed to draw closer, their glowing eyes locking onto him with a sense of finality. The weight of the forest's curse pressed upon him, and yet, there was still a flicker of defiance in his soul. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking but resolute. "I will not return." The spirits hesitated. For a moment there was silence. Then the spirit leader's face twisted into a wicked smile, and the glow around it intensified. "You think you have a choice?" the spirit leader asked, its voice dark and heavy with mockery. "The curse is within you. It is a part of you now. You cannot escape it." The forest itself seemed to shift around them, the ground beneath them trembling. And then, with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in agony, the forest began to reclaim what it had lost. Chaik's vision blurred as the spirits descended upon him, their forms engulfing him in an unholy embrace. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the faint image of Kofi's face. His eyes filled with sadness, but also with peace. And so, Chaik's journey ended not with freedom, but with the realization that the forest's curse could never truly be escaped. He had lost Kofi, yes, but in the end, it was his own fate that had been sealed. The spirits of the forest would never let go. The villagers would whisper of Chaik's return for years to come, but none would ever truly understand the depth of the sacrifice, or the cost of disobeying the warnings of the elders. For the forest had claimed its price.